Of course, all the time, diplomatic pressure being exerted. We heard formal statements from Kofi Annan and Tony Blair earlier today, but perhaps even more revealing has been an unguarded moment which was caught on a microphone in a conversation between George Bush and Tony Blair, which they didn't realise was going out on the air. Let's hear what George Bush had to say.
See, the irony is that what they need to do is get Syria to get Hezbollah to stop doing this shit, and it's over.
Anna Bolton, our political editor, is at the G8 in St. Petersburg, and that's quite a little insight on the thinking behind the scenes there at G8, Adam.
Well, yes, it is. I mean, in fact, obviously, President Bush, the born-again Christian, saying SH1T is clearly something of amusing news value, but the fact is we hear several minutes of conversation between the two men where they are fairly unbuttoned, and we get a view not just of what's going on as far as the Middle East is concerned, but also of other areas of this summit. Now, with me, if you like, doing a sort of special relationship British-UK analysis of what went on is Jamie Rubin, our foreign affairs expert, who of course has been behind the scenes as well. And what's interesting about this is it's not a formal presentation, so from the very first word you get a taste of the two men, really.
Yeah, you really do. I guess Joe Blair, you were saying to me earlier, is Bush's casual way, but I think what you really get is an insight into how they do business together. I was struck particularly by the way in which Tony Blair said that he was prepared to go to the Middle East to try to advance the process, and he could go even if he didn't succeed, while Condoleezza Rice, who Bush said he was prepared to send to the region, had to have a victory, had to have a success. And so you really saw the dynamic of the British and the American approach to the Middle East, where the British Prime Minister realizes that George Bush isn't going to send Condoleezza Rice to the region unless there's some guarantee of success, which is very different than previous.
And that he, Blair, can create it. So what he's actually doing is admitting, really, what's often been accused, that he is a trailblazer very much for the Americans and for the Bush administration. We also saw clearly just how fed up they are with Bashar Assad of Syria in particular.
Well, absolutely. That was the most interesting exchange where, you know, they're talking about Bashar as if almost like two allies talking about an opponent. What's he thinking? Why is he doing it? And it really shed some light on the way Tony Blair and George Bush think about the Middle East, because they basically still think Iraq is going to be a success. They even talked as if there was going to be peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and that they surmised, therefore, that Bashar Assad hated all this good stuff, all this progress, and that's why he's supporting Hezbollah's efforts to cause so many problems and bring on this crisis.
And exactly the other thing which struck me, which, you know, is not a surprise, but they don't say it, do they, is basically how dismissive they are of a lot of their colleagues. You know, Tony Blair's going to give a news conference in an hour or so, and doubtless he's going to say, we discussed trade and all that. But what do we hear him saying on the tape? He says, on this trade thingy, we really didn't make much progress. Sounding a bit like Prince Charles there, talking about a trade thingy.
Yes, and speaking of candor, I was struck by the way George Bush talked about Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the United Nations. Basically, first he used I guess the third person, they, the UN. The UN is supposed to be all the countries together, working together, and he was disdainful, saying they, the UN, only care about a ceasefire. They don't get it. They don't understand that this is about Hezbollah's refusal to disarm. And the one role he did see for Kofi Annan was, as he put it, get on the phone with Bashar Assad and make something happen to talk Hezbollah out of it. So it was definitely a frank exchange.
And a real teamwork as well. At one point, Blair saying to Bush, are you going to say that? And Bush saying, well, I will if you want me to. Right. You know, you could see the two of them working absolutely very closely together. And I think it does show really what we've been saying, what Sex and I've been saying this week, that the US is in the driving seat in this Middle East process, and wherever it goes, it looks like Tony Blair, at least, is going to back it.
Well, yeah, and in fairness to President Bush and Tony Blair, we've been teasing them a little bit, I think they were largely successful. coming into this summit, Jacques Chirac and Vladimir Putin were blaming the Israelis, and then now all the leaders put out a statement that clearly blames Hezbollah. So Bush and Blair were successful to that extent, but as you put it, Tony Blair knows, and that's why he was lobbying George Bush, lobbying him, we really need a force in the region, lobbying him, we've got to get the Israelis to agree to that force, and I'll go if you want me to, or you can send Condi, but yes, kind of tag team diplomacy.
Right. Jamie Rubin, thank you very much indeed.